This build does over 1 million damage with its dot or damage over time component, and you can see it's absolutely massive. This build is also really simple to play. Runic Invocation will grant you a raw rune when you use a fire skill, a Gon Rune when you use a lightning skill, and a heal rune when you use a cold skill. However, we're going to take all of that and just throw it out the window because we're only going to generate Gon or the lightning runes with this particular build, making it very simple to play. The runes can be seen above your character when you generate them, and you'll see there's one here. If we happen to use Runic Invocation when having one rune, we're not going to get that enormous dot effect that you just saw. However, with this build setup, whenever you have 2 or more runes, we're going to go ahead and discharge them with the Runic Invocation, and that will provide us with that massive dot on the enemy. The added advantage of 2 runes is that it'll actually automatically deploy these bombs underneath the enemy where they are, and we use increased radius to ensure that it hits them if the target happens to be moving. The 3 rune version is also effective, arguably better for single target when you get to bosses because it also has its own damage over time component in addition to the massive dot, and these ball lightnings can actually be stacked, which will be incredibly difficult to see here, but you can actually stack multiple of those ball lightnings, having them hit the same target at the same time. So far, we know we're only generating lightning runes, and we want to deploy these when we have 2 or more runes. Now, why is that? The reason for this is the Brand of Deception passive, and this means when we have 5 points allocated into the skill, any lightning skill that costs 15 mana will apply Brand of Deception, and that is the massive dot that you're seeing. It's increased by shock chance, so we'll of course be stacking that as well, and it deals additional damage to bosses in the form of spell damage when you get 7 or more points here, and in general just will continue to scale with this node as well. Teleport will be our mobility tool, however we're also going to use Frostwall, and this is going to help set up these massive hits that we get on the enemies. We can go through the wall, cast a single lightning blast, and then detonate our explosion, and that's where we're getting these massive ticks. Frostwall is going to have a number of buffs and synergy associated with this build. The most important things are it's going to generate ward, and the second most important thing I want to point out is Aspirant's Arrival to reduce the mana cost and increase the damage per second of existence before you travel through it. The reduced mana cost is actually getting applied to Runic Invocation. Here you can see Runic Invocation costs 32 mana. After going through the Frostwall, you'll see it costs 20 mana. Now, this is a concern. If you put a third talent point into Aspirant's Arrival, you'll actually reduce the mana cost after you travel through it to a point that your Runic Invocation will not proc the Brand of Deception. So keep that in mind. You need to make sure that you always are being able to proc that whether you have 2 or 3 lightning runes. When you're running echoes, all you need to do is just quickly travel around, get 2 of these runes up, and then use your Runic Invocation. This is going to detonate underneath the enemies, and again, due to increased radius, it's basically going to automatically hit them. Very rarely does an enemy actually move out of the way and avoid the attack, and you can always cast another one. You can see just how quickly you can actually set off these bombs very rapidly, and your mana sustain is not a problem at all. You can always use Frostwall to grant additional ward, and it's going to give you haste as well, so make sure you're taking advantage of that. It's especially good when you're defending an objective, or some of the things like Charge the Beacon on the Echoes, where you're running around in a tight area, just to keep your ward up and just give you some more survivability, and allow you some faster movement to dodge the enemy attacks as well. Flame Ward remains on the bar, and you can manually activate this. However, if you notice when you go through the Frostwall, it'll actually activate on its own, but again, you can reserve this on top of that for additional protection or survivability as needed. Blast Blast Boom is the easiest way I can think of to remember the gameplay or rotation of this build. Lightning Blast, Runic Invocation, Blast Blast Boom, and everything is essentially going to die. Now, if you make a mistake and you accidentally get 3 runes, it doesn't really matter because Ball Lightning is still going to apply that massive dot, and it has a very large area of effect as well, meaning you'll most likely get more than one enemy and still have pretty good success clearing the map. I do want to mention the skill Flame Rush can be transformed into a lightning ability. However, at the time of this video, it can be a little bit clunky. Sometimes it has lag attached to it, other times it just holds down the button even though you've released it, overall just making it more clunky than Teleport, which can actually cut corners. So this is the reason why Teleport is in the build at this point. This may change at some point in which the build link that you'll find in the video description will be updated as well. To be transparent, I'm still tinkering with this build. I'm still certainly working on getting resist cap, and I'm still working on getting better blessings to make the build stronger overall. However, I'll upload all of the current gear, idle setups, blessings, and everything onto a build link for you so that you can see how this build gets updated and progresses as time goes. As mentioned, none of these uniques or set items actually are required in order to make this build function. However, let's talk about a few that will enhance this build and its overall output. Villatria's Stormcrown is going to grant you lightning penetration. On top of that, you're going to get bonuses to lightning skills, just furthering the number of specialization points that you can put within them. Finally, you're going to get 1% shock chance per intelligence. This is very important because that damage over time component that we have scales with additional shock chance. Fundamental criterion is probably been seen by many people if you've been looking at various Runemaster builds. However, it still applies to being beneficial for this build as well. However, you're going to get your scaling from dexterity since we're using Gon runes as the second rune. You'll still get the scaling from having a staff and using Gon as the first rune, so you can kind of double dip in that sense, and overall this adds a lot of damage to the build, but you can find some comparable exalted chests if you happen to get some lucky rolls. The weapon choice is flexible as well. I happen to be using this one just because of the large amount of increased lightning damage that it got from the legendary potential, but you could use a comparable exalted one like seen here if you have the criterion equipped. If you don't have the criterion equipped as a body armor, you're free to use more weapon selections, and you can certainly again use a fine exalted or even a well-rolled rare with an offhand. Knowledge of an erased mage is going to pair well because we're already getting +1 to skills from the helmet, so this adds further specialization that we can do with additional points. Overall, just adds a nice benefit to the build. Depending how this rolls, it could be very beneficial or have nothing of benefit to add on top of that, so you may again find some exalteds that you could use in place of this, or even some other uniques can be pretty good for this build as well. Tome of Elements is a great choice as this can add 34% chance to shock, which is in return going to add 34% damage to that damage over time component, so keep your options open, and this build is definitely flexible with a lot of the gear choices. Since we get scaling from both intelligence and dexterity, and vitality also provides life, that makes plus all attributes or just getting a number of attributes on pieces very nice. In Blood of the Exile we get both dexterity and intelligence. Swallowing of the Erase gives bonus to all attributes, so we get a little bit of survivability along with damage output. Just good items to have here. I'm yet to really find a belt that I love for this particular build. Isidore's is a really underrated belt in my opinion. It adds a tremendous amount of armor. You can see if I unequip this, I actually lose 11% mitigation, so this brings us up to 33%, just dramatically increasing survivability. There may be something to swap out in place of this as we collect more gear, or just find a well-rolled piece as well. Ideally, you'll find a neck piece that has some good offensive prefixes along with chance to shock as a suffix. This again will just further the damage output. Rings are pretty easy to come by just because there's a number of stats that you can benefit from, so keep your eyes open for a good pair of rings. In this case, I've got a ring here with solid resist and some dexterity to boost the offensive capabilities. Idols again have some solid flexibility, which just makes gearing this character really easy to start scaling and ramping up that damage. Flat lightning damage is going to scale really well with everything else you have going on. Shock on hit is again going to increase the damage over time. Regular increased damage over time will also scale that component, and you can find smaller idols that have chance to shock as well, so tons of options for this build. Should be really easy to set up. We'll finish with some unedited gameplay so you can see just how mobile and efficient this build is. The simple playstyle makes this an incredibly easy to master build, so if you've been timid to try Runemaster before due to the gear requirements or rune combinations, this is an excellent choice. With no unique or build defining items, you can bring this online as soon as you begin the endgame, and it will only improve as your character grows. The damage output has killed multiple bosses on empowered monoliths with respective resists to the boss's damage type between just 30 and 40, so it's more than capable of surviving, thanks to all the ward that mages have access to, and that will only be improved as blessings are fine-tuned. Enjoy the remainder of the gameplay, and as always, thanks for taking the time to watch, and have a great day.